After vanquishing the titanic void dragon in a ferocious battle that shook the very mountains and scorched the sky, the dragon knight rode back to the capital with his dragon companion at his side, expecting banners of celebration and joyful crowds. But instead, he was met by suspicious glances and whispers, the air thick with something far darker than smoke from the recently extinguished battlefields, as jealous nobles convened in shadowy chambers to plot his downfall. The royal court, draped in finery and deceit, hosted a lavish banquet filled with wine and praise that tasted strangely bitter on his tongue. And though his deeds were recounted with false admiration, he felt the undercurrent of resentment from those who envied his fame and feared his power, making him uneasy amidst the splendor. Unbeknownst to him, the goblet he raised in gratitude was laced with a toxin prepared by the very hands he had sworn to defend. A slow poison that seeped into his veins, turning his limbs heavy and his vision hazy, while the clinking of glasses and laughter masked the treachery taking place. Servants disguised as well-wishers seized him under the guise of escorting him to rest, dragging his fading form down secret passageways lit by torches that cast grotesque shadows on the walls, their faces void of empathy as they delivered him to a damp stone cell deep beneath the palace. The heavy iron door slammed shut with a resounding clang that echoed his betrayal, and the chill of the dungeon seeped into his bones, the only light coming from a flickering torch that danced mockingly, leaving him to ponder how those he protected could so quickly turn into conspirators against him. His dragon companion, sensing something amiss, attempted to follow, its massive claws scraping against the stone as it roared for its rider. But the nobles had anticipated this, lining the corridor with archers who loosed arrows tipped with poison and magic designed to fell even the mightiest of beasts. The dragon's agonized roar reverberated through the dungeon, as enchanted arrows pierced its scales, its eyes wide with disbelief and sorrow as it collapsed onto the cold floor, wings twitching weakly, blood pooling around its body, while the dragon knight watched helplessly from behind iron, Bars's heart shattering at the sight of his most loyal friend, dying because of human treachery. He pressed his forehead against the cold metal, tears mixing with sweat, as he screamed in rage and despair, the echo of his voice bouncing off the stone walls, his fists clenched so tightly that his nails drew blood, a stark contrast to the indifference displayed by the nobles above who continued their revelry, toasting to a future free of heroes who could challenge their authority. Days blended together as he languished in the cell, his body weakened by the poison and his spirit crushed by the loss of his dragon. Yet his mind remained sharp, replaying memories of battles fought side by side with his companion and the laughter they shared after victories. Now tainted by the knowledge that the kingdom viewed him as expendable, he remembered soaring above fields of fire on his dragon's back, feeling the wind rush past as they dived toward enemies, and he contrasted that exhilaration with the suffocating darkness of the dungeon, the disparity fueling a growing ember of anger that refused to be snuffed out despite his weakened state. In the silence of the cell, the only sounds were the distant drip of water and the haunting echo of his dragon's final cry, each drop in reverberation, further entrenching his sense of betrayal and loss, while the cold stone around him seemed to close in like a grave. He envisioned the faces of villagers he had saved, the smiles of children who looked up to him as a symbol of hope, and the gratitude of farmers whose harvests he protected, and these memories fueled his resolve, reminding him that not everyone in the kingdom was complicit in this treachery. The Dragon Knight's mind oscillated between memories of kindness from common folk and the cruelty of nobles, creating an internal conflict that stoked his desire for revenge, while simultaneously reminding him of his original oath to protect the innocent. He attempted to muster his strength, pulling against the chains that bound him, but the poison's lingering effects rendered him weak, and the iron bit into his flesh, forcing him to endure physical pain that matched his emotional torment. As hours turned into days, hunger gnawed at his stomach, and exhaustion clouded his thoughts. But he refused to succumb to despair, clinging to the belief that somehow he would find a way to hold those responsible accountable and honor his fallen dragon companion. Occasionally he would hear distant voices of other prisoners murmuring their own tales of injustice, their whispers weaving through the damp air to reach his ears, reinforcing his understanding that the corruption in the palace extended beyond his own betrayal. He carved marks into the stone with a small rock, tallying each passing hour and keeping his mind focused on the passage of time. each etched line representing his refusal to fade quietly into oblivion despite the noble's plans. Amidst the darkness, he whispered to his dragon companion's spirit, vowing that he would avenge its death and ensure that its loyalty and sacrifice would not be forgotten. His words hanging in the air like a promise to the void. He meditated, focusing on the embers of strength still coursing through his veins, channeling the latent magic he shared with his dragon to combat the poison. Feeling a faint warmth spread from his heart like a flicker of hope in the cold, oppressive dungeon. Memories of his training resurfaced, lessons about honor and courage taught by his mentor, an old dragon knight who warned that danger often came not from beasts, but from human envy and greed, and he realized that those lessons had been prophetic. He contemplated the irony that the kingdom's greatest threat now stemmed not from mythical creatures, but from the very people entrusted with guiding and protecting the realm. He felt a growing determination to uproot that corruption. As his strength slowly returned, he began to test the bars of his cell, pressing his weight against them, searching for weaknesses, but the metal held firm, reminding him that brute force alone would not free him. He listened intently for shifts in the patterns of guards' footsteps, mapping their movements in his mind, preparing for any opportunity that might present itself, because he understood that patience was as vital as power when facing treachery. His dreams were haunted by visions of his dragon dying, repeatedly the image playing like a relentless reel in his mind, and each time he awoke, sweat dripping down his face, his sorrow deepened, solidifying into a resolve that burned hotter than any flame. The dragon knight's anger simmered, but he also feared that rage could consume him, transforming him into something unrecognizable. And he wrestled with the desire for vengeance and the duty to remain honorable despite the circumstances. He began to sense a strange presence in the corner of his cell, faint glow that seemed out of place in the damp darkness, and though at first he dismissed it as a hallucination from hunger and grief, the light persisted, pulsing gently as if waiting for him to notice. His curiosity piqued. He crawled toward the glow, his fingers outstretched to touch it, feeling warmth emanating from the light. A stark contrast to the cold stone, and as he reached it, he felt a tingle of energy that sent shivers through his body. The glow slowly expanded, illuminating the cell with a soft, ethereal radiance, casting away the shadows and revealing every crack and imperfection in the stone. And he realized that this was no ordinary light, but something otherworldly. The light coalesced into a crystalline interface suspended in the air at its surface, shimmering with symbols and words that seemed to vibrate with power, and the dragon knight stared in awe, his sorrow momentarily forgotten as he wondered what this apparition could mean. As the symbols shifted, forming letters in a language both ancient and strangely familiar, he felt a presence behind the words, an intelligence that observed him with understanding and compassion, as if recognizing his suffering. The interface presented a message, offering him a choice that would alter his fate, and he felt the weight of the decision even before comprehending the full implications, his heart pounding with a mix of fear, hope, and anticipation. He leaned closer, straining to read the words through the glow in his breath, caught as he realized that the message promised power beyond anything he had known, but also warned that embracing such power came with a price that could forever change who he was. The Dragon Knight hesitated, understanding that choices made in despair could lead to unforeseen consequences. Yet he also knew that the path of passivity would allow corruption to thrive unchecked, and his dragon companion's death to go unavenged. The words on the interface shifted, clarifying that he could either continue to uphold the ideals of a protector and forgive those who betrayed him, or embrace the monstrous legacy of dragons and unleash justice upon those who harmed him and his friend, effectively choosing between mercy and retribution. In that moment, memories of kindness from commoners and cruelty from nobles clashed violently in his mind, his heart torn between the desire to remain the knight he had been and the temptation to become something more powerful and terrifying to ensure that betrayal never again went unpunished. He felt the ghost of his dragon companion's presence beside him, as if urging him to decide not based on anger alone but on the greater good, reminding him that dragons, while feared, were also wise and noble creatures, capable of both destruction and protection. The Dragon Knight inhaled deeply, drawing strength from that memory, and he prepared to make a choice that would not only determine his destiny, but also reshape the kingdom's future his fingers. Hovering over the glowing words as he felt a surge of purpose course through him, knowing that his next action would echo far beyond the walls of his cell. The crystalline interface floating in the damp cell glowed brighter at swirling symbols, coalescing into clear sentences that hovered before the Dragon Knight's eyes, offering him a choice between two fates that could not be more different: to continue his role as humanity's protector, forgiving the betrayal and upholding his ideals, or to embrace the primal power of dragonkind and become the monster his enemies feared, wielding vengeance against those who had wronged him. For a long moment he stared at the shimmering words, the glow casting a pale light on his weary face, while the distant drip of water and the fading scent of his dragon companion's blood anchored him in reality, forcing him to acknowledge the gravity of the decision before him. Memories of his dragon partner flooded his mind, vivid and raw, showing their first flight together, the thrill of soaring high above the world in the quiet moments beside campfires where human and dragon rested in mutual trust and companionship, moments now stained by the cruelty that had ripped them apart. Alongside those tender recollections came images of the nobles' sneering faces at the banquet, the poisonous wine trickling past his lips, and the cruel laughter that echoed from above as his dragon companion cried out in agony, each scene fueling a fire of rage that threatened to consume his rationality. His master's teachings echoed faintly, reminding him that true strength lies not only in power, but also in restraint. Yet the system's offer of unimaginable power pulsed with seductive promise, promising an end to helplessness and the ability to impose justice upon those who abused authority. The first option, continue protecting humanity, implied forgiving those who had committed unforgivable acts, enduring humiliation, and working within a corrupt system to reform it from within. An approach that appealed to the remnants of the knightly code ingrained in him since childhood, but felt nearly impossible given his current anger and grief. The second option embraced the dragon's path, called to the primal part of him that seethed with fury at his friend's death, and desired immediate retribution, a path that would allow him to wield the raw, destructive power of dragons to burn away corruption, but risked losing the humanity that defined him. He visualized potential outcomes. In one future, he stood in the halls of justice, his dragon companion's death avenged through lawful means. But he was older, wearier still, haunted by memories, while another future showed him bathed in flames, feared and revered in equal measure, having eradicated tyrants, but standing isolated, a legend shrouded in both glory and infamy. The system sensed his turmoil and displayed images of people he would affect. A little girl from a village who once offered him bread and water after a battle, her smile radiant. An old farmer who would die if not defended during a bandit raid, and the frightened eyes of a noble's son who might be innocent despite his lineage. Illustrating the complexity of the world he sought to change. He reached out a trembling hand toward the glowing words and felt a gentle warmth emanate from them, like the comfort of sunlight through clouds. And he whispered to the unseen intelligence guiding the system, asking whether either choice guaranteed that the corrupt would be punished and the innocent protected. In response, the words shifted to reveal that while the choices set different paths, his actions along each would ultimately determine his legacy, and that no path was inherently good or evil. Rather, they were frames through which he could express his values, making his personal choices within them all the more important. This revelation struck him as both liberating and daunting, because it meant that he could forge his own way within the chosen path, melding his sense of justice with the power he was given, but it also meant that failure to uphold his ideals would be entirely his responsibility. He closed his eyes and let his thoughts drift to his dragon companion's final gaze, a look of trust and love, unmarred by fear, and he felt a tear escape down his cheek as he considered what his friend would want for him and whether avenging its death would honor or tarnish its memory. His dragon had been a creature of both might and wisdom, ferocious in battle, yet gentle with children, and he realized that dragons were not solely monsters. They were guardians and teachers, creatures of balance whose reputation had been twisted by human fear and ignorance. That realization softened his view of the second option, because he began to see that becoming a dragon did not necessarily mean becoming a mindless beast of destruction. Rather, it could mean embracing a form that balanced fury with wisdom, much like his fallen companion had done. He weighed the thought of forgiving those who had betrayed him, and wondered whether such forgiveness would inspire change in the hearts of the nobles, or simply embolden them to betray again. And he grimaced at the idea of returning to a court that would continue to view him with suspicion and envy. The thought of confronting the court again as a human made his stomach churn, because he imagined the false smiles, the whispered conspiracies, and the constant fear of another betrayal. Whereas in the form of a dragon, he would command fear and respect, and his enemies would think twice before crossing him. As he opened his eyes, the system presented a brief vision of his dragon companion soaring through clouds, turning its head toward him as if encouraging him to be brave and true to himself, reinforcing his sense that his choice should not be driven solely by anger but by what would best allow him to protect those who mattered to him. He thought of the farmer's daughter he had rescued from wolves, the baker who had refused payment after he defended the town, and the young squire who dreamed of becoming a knight like him, and he questioned whether his transformation into something feared would inspire terror in those he sought to protect, or empower them by showing that even monsters could be heroes. His breathing slowed as he considered that if he remained human and protected the kingdom while ignoring his own pain, he might become bitter and resentful over time, potentially making him a liability instead of a protector. Whereas embracing the dragon could allow him to channel his anger constructively, if he remained disciplined. The system quietly highlighted a sentence indicating that the dragon's path would grant him access to ancient knowledge and power, allowing him to understand the true nature of dragons and their role in balancing the world knowledge that had been lost when dragons were hunted and misunderstood. That potential to learn and perhaps restore dragons' rightful place intrigued him, because he believed his companion's death symbolized more than personal tragedy. It represented the broken bond between humans and dragons, and perhaps his transformation could help mend it. His heart hammered as he asked himself if he was ready to give up his humanity, but a voice inside responded that he would not be giving up his humanity. Rather, he would be expanding it, blending it with something older and wiser, like forging a sword by combining different metals. Suddenly, a memory surfaced of his mentor telling him stories of the Age of Legends, when dragons and humans fought side by side, protecting the realm from threats beyond mortal comprehension, and he realized that this was his opportunity to revive that partnership and honor the past. Feeling the weight of destiny on his shoulders, he turned to the first option one last time and imagined kneeling before the very nobles who poisoned him, extending forgiveness. And he felt bile rise in his throat, because the thought felt like betrayal to his friend's memory and to the justice he believed in. He focused on the second option, the dragon path, and though he knew it would alienate many, he also saw the potential to wield power with compassion, to be feared by the corrupt and revered by the just, and his pulse quickened with a sense of purpose. He asked the system if taking the dragon path would allow him to spare innocence and strike only those who deserved it. And the glowing words assured him that his choices would remain his own, that the power was a tool rather than a master, and his moral compass would determine how it was used. Relief mixed with determination as he understood that he could wield dragon power without becoming a mindless beast, and he tightened his grip on the edge of the interface, feeling a surge of warmth flow up his arms like the first lick of fire ready to ignite. His mind returned to his dragon companion's trusting gaze, and he whispered that he would carry their bond forward in a way that honored both their strengths, promising not to let his friend's sacrifice be in vain or be reduced to a footnote in a tale of betrayal. With his decision made, he pressed his palm firmly against the glowing words of the dragon path, and an electric current surged through him, causing his muscles to spasm and his breath to catch as the system merged with his very soul, threading ancient dragon energy through his veins like molten lava. He felt scales forming under his skin, bones stretching and strengthening, and his senses sharpening as the darkness of the cell receded behind a burst of light that enveloped his entire being, filling him with a power that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Visions of ancient dragons flooded his mind, mountains shaking as they landed, oceans boiling under their fire, yet also moments of dragons, teaching humans the secrets of magic and watching over villages like guardians, reinforcing the idea that he could be a protector even as a dragon. The transformation was agonizing and transcendent, his human body reshaped and fused with the essence of a dragon. And as each moment of pain subsided, It was replaced by a rush of energy and a deeper understanding of primal instincts he never knew existed. He clenched his teeth and tried to hold on to memories of laughter with friends of his, master's lessons, and of peaceful nights under the stars, fearing that if he lost those memories, he would lose the humanity that would guide his actions once the transformation completed. The system's voice now inside his mind urged him to stay focused, reminding him that he had chosen this path consciously to enact justice with wisdom, not to vent blind rage, and that losing himself to anger would betray the purpose of his decision. As the transformation reached its peak, he let out a roar that shook the cell walls, a roar that was both human and dragon in its timbre, echoing with the pain of betrayal and the promise of retribution. And he felt the last vestiges of the poison burned away by the dragonfire coursing through him. When the light subsided, he opened his eyes to see his reflection in the shimmering interface, a creature with scales the color of polished obsidian, eyes that glowed like molten gold, and wings folded against his back. But within those features he recognized the spirit that had once been a human knight. His chains lay shattered on the floor, melted by the heat of his transformation, and the iron bars of his cell were warped. Unable to contain the new form he had chosen, physical manifestation of his liberation from both his imprisonment and the limitations imposed upon him by the corrupt court, he took a tentative step, feeling the power in his limbs and the weight of his wings, and he marveled at the strength coursing through him, equal parts exhilarating and sobering, because he knew that with such power came immense responsibility. He stretched his wings slightly, feeling the membranes catch the stagnant air, and in that motion he felt connected not only to his dragon companion, but to every dragon that had flown over the realm, as if he had tapped into a collective memory of flight and fire and ancient wisdom. His enhanced senses detected the faint heartbeat of a guard patrolling above, the rustling of rats in the walls, the crackling of the torch flame, and he realized that nothing in the palace could surprise him now, nothing except perhaps the depth of his own transformation. The system reminded him gently that the next steps were his alone. He could break free of the dungeon, confront the nobles, and decide whether to exact vengeance or offer mercy. That every action he took would define the new legend he was about to create. He inhaled, feeling the fire build within his chest, and as he exhaled, a small plume of smoke curled from his nostrils, a sign of the dragon, power ready to be unleashed. And he focused his mind on the purpose that fueled him, which was not destruction for its own sake, but the rebalancing of a world thrown into chaos by human greed. With a newfound determination, he looked up at the ceiling, gauging its thickness with his dragon senses, and he prepared to break free. But before he did, he whispered one last silent farewell to the human life he was leaving behind, acknowledging that he could never again be just a knight, because he had become something far more formidable. He promised himself that he would honor the dragon essence within him by upholding the values he cherished: justice, loyalty, and compassion, while using his newfound strength to protect those who deserved it and punish those who exploited the weak. As he crouched, ready to leap toward the dungeon exit, he felt the system integrate fully into his consciousness, a guiding presence that would offer counsel but not command, and he felt comforted, knowing he was not alone in navigating the complex path ahead. He took one last look at the cell that had been his prison and his crucible, its stone walls etched with the marks he had carved, its torch still flickering, and he nodded, silently thanking it for being the place where his destiny had been forged anew. Then, with a powerful thrust of his legs and a burst of strength from his wings, he launched himself upward, shattering stone and iron, emerging from the darkness into the corridors above, ready to confront the nobles who had plotted his demise and to begin the next chapter of his life as both the Dragon Knight and the dragon they feared, carrying within him the sorrow of betrayal and the burning resolve to reshape the kingdom's fate. Ask ChatGPT. With an eruption that shattered stone and silence alike, the Dragon Knight exploded from the depths beneath the palace. His wings unfurled within the narrow passage as he stepped into a corridor bathed in shadows and torchlight. Each movement of his newly draconic body shimmered in hues of blackened steel under the flickering flames. His horns grazed the arching ceiling while his limbs, once human, now moved with the weight and strength of a predator. Behind him, the echo of collapsed rock marked the grave of the knight he used to be. A storm of shattered brick and ash fell like snow in his wake, Yet not a shard could pierce the armor of scale forged by magic and fury. He drew a long, grounding breath. The choking scent of mildew gave way to a breeze hinting at sky and freedom. And in that whisper of wind, he tasted freedom and vengeance. He moved forward with unnatural silence, his steps deliberate, each clawed foot carving into the marble as if the very palace resisted his return. Around each corner, he expected steel or spell, yet only silence greeted him, broken only by the steady rhythm of his breath and the faint tremors of footsteps retreating far above. His mind, sharp and clear despite the transformation, traced the familiar paths through the halls, the very halls where he once bowed to false kings, where his name had once been cheered before being cursed. He passed a mural of his own image and honor once, painted in celebration of his victory against the Void Dragon, and saw now only betrayal etched beneath it, a face surrounded by smiling liars who toasted his demise. A pair of guards rounded the corridor, blades half drawn, as wide as saucers, as they beheld the creature that wore the shape of the hero they had once followed. The younger dropped his sword and fled, boots slipping on polished stone, while the older remained rooted to the spot, his mouth parting as if to speak, but no words came. The Dragon Knight offered no flame, only a glance that pierced deeper than fire, and with a faint nod, the veteran let his blade fall to the floor and stepped aside. Mercy was not weakness, it was memory. Further ahead, the air grew warmer, fragrant with the cloying perfumes of wealth and power, and the doors to the banquet hall stood ajar, gold leaf glinting like rot beneath a mask. Inside, nobles laughed and raised their cups, unaware or in denial of the storm approaching. With a single push, he shattered the doors inward, splinters exploding like shrapnel, and silence fell like a sword as every eye turned to the shadow now filling the threshold. They saw scales, wings, flame, but they also saw memory. They saw the man they had poisoned, reborn not as a corpse, but as a reckoning. Goblets clattered to the ground. The queen's cousin stepped forward, arrogance and fear fighting in his trembling voice, declaring him a beast, a usurper, a monster. The Dragon Knight did not reply, simply walked past him, toward the long banquet table where betrayal had been toasted like wine. He spoke not to the nobles, but to the guards lining the walls, the same men and women who had once saluted him, who had stood beside him in battles beyond memory. "You know who I am," he said. "You know what they did?" His voice, though altered by power, still carried the weight of honor. Blades wavered, some lowered. None dared strike. Then came the tremor, deep and primal, a new danger unleashed by the desperate. Two dragons, chained, bred in darkness, were released into the hall, summoned as beasts of war. Their roars filled the chamber, not with fury, but with confusion, pain, and longing. They did not understand the crowd. The collars around their throats glowed with sorcery. The Dragon Knight stepped between them and the nobles, speaking in the language of flame and sky, words only dragons understood. "You are not their weapons," he said. "You are mine no more than you are theirs. You are free." The dragons hesitated. Magic crackled at their collars. The queen's cousin screamed for them to strike, but one dragon, a bronze-scaled male, took a step back. The other followed, their eyes wide as the knight extended a claw and severed their chains with a single breath of fire. The collars melted, and so did the nobles' resolve. The dragons did not attack. They stood beside him. The nobles cowered. Some begged, others screamed. The queen's cousin ran. The Dragon Knight let him go not out of mercy, but because his punishment would be carved by history, not flame. He turned to the people now flooding the hall, the servants, the guards, the commoners who had heard the commotion and come with hearts full of rage and awe. "This is not conquest," he declared. "This is correction." And as the fires dimmed and the dragons exhaled smoke into the vaulted ceilings, the Dragon Knight stepped onto the dais, once meant for kings. He looked upon the faces that once condemned him and said, "Your time is over. The era of flame has begun." As the Dragon Knight glided over the palace courtyards, his scales shimmering under the pale moonlight, he felt a rising tide of rage and purpose, the image of his fallen dragon companion fueling, the fire burning within his chest as he prepared to enact the burning justice promised in the grand hall. He banked sharply, angling his descent toward the main courtyard, where torches flickered and soldiers scrambled, their shouts mingling with the clank of armor as news of the dragon's presence spread. And he landed with the force of a thunderclap, his talons digging into the cobblestones and sending cracks spiderwebbing through the ground. The sudden impact silenced the courtyard for a heartbeat. Every gaze fixed on the towering creature that stood before the palace's ornate entrance. Wings partially extended, his breath releasing curls of smoke that wove through the cold night air. The Dragon Knight's eyes swept across the assembled guards, many of whom he recognized from battles past. Men and women who had bled and laughed beside him, and he felt a pang of sorrow knowing that they were being used as shields by the corrupt elites he intended to punish. Raising his voice, he addressed the soldiers, his tone carrying authority and urgency, telling them that his fight was not with those who served dutifully, but with the nobles who had betrayed both him and the kingdom, and he urged them to step aside if they did not wish to be caught in the crossfire of his vengeance. Some soldiers, recognizing the wisdom in his words and the glint of familiar honor in his fiery gaze, lowered their weapons and stepped back, trusting that he would indeed spare them and focus his wrath on the true culprits, while others, bound by strict orders or fear of punishment, kept their spears raised, their faces pale but determined. In response to the latter, the Dragon Knight nodded solemnly, acknowledging their courage even as he prepared to neutralize them without lethal force, because his moral compass still guided his actions despite the dragon blood surging through his veins. He inhaled deeply, feeling the fire coil within his chest like a serpent, and then exhaled a controlled burst of flame that swept across the ground in a wide arc, creating a wall of heat and light that forced the remaining soldiers to retreat without incinerating them, flames licking at their boots and scattering them without consuming them, as the soldiers fell back to elite knights clad in enchanted armor stepped forward, their weapons glowing with runes designed to pierce dragon scales. And the Dragon Knight recognized them as warriors who had been loyal to the court rather than to any single commander. Their expressions grim as they raised their blades, watched their movements carefully, noting the disciplined way they approached when they lunged in unison. He sidestepped one strike while swinging his tail to knock the other off balance, the force sending the knight sprawling but alive, while he ducked under the first knight's blade and used his wing to sweep him aside. The two recovered quickly, showing their prowess, and the Dragon Knight nodded in silent respect before using his claws to disarm them with swift, precise motions, his dragon instincts complementing his knightly training, allowing him to win without killing a subtle warning to any who sought to test him further. Suddenly, a chorus of arcane chants filled the air as court wizards emerged from the palace doors, their hands glowing with magical symbols, their faces a mix of fear and determination as they prepared spells meant to contain or harm a dragon, ancient incantations that had not been used for generations. The Dragon Knight felt the tremor of magical energy coalescing and instinctively spread his wings, creating gusts of wind that disrupted the rhythm of the spells, causing some to fizzle out before completion, while others veered off course, harmlessly striking the courtyard walls. One particularly skilled wizard, however, completed a binding spell, manifesting shimmering chains of pure energy that shot toward the Dragon Knight, wrapping around his forelegs and tightening with a force that might have held any ordinary dragon. The sensation of being restrained triggered memories of his time in the dungeon and reignited his anger. He summoned his inner fire and let it surge through his scales, burning the chains to ash in a blaze of orange and blue flames, demonstrating that not even enchanted bindings could hold him now. The wizards recoiled, their eyes wide with terror and awe, but one of them recovered quickly and launched a bolt of ice toward his head, a shard that crackled with frosty magic and aimed to strike between his eyes where his scales were thinner. With reflexes honed by battle and enhanced by dragon blood, he snapped his head to the side, allowing the ice to graze his cheek, leaving a line of frost that melted almost immediately as his internal heat radiated outward. And he countered with a plume of fire directed above their heads as a warning shot, singeing their hats and robes without incinerating them. He spoke to the wizards, his voice layered with dragon growl and knightly authority, telling them that magic should be used to protect the people, not to uphold the tyranny of corrupt nobles, and he encouraged them to reconsider their loyalty while they still had the chance. Some wizards lowered their hands, the glow fading from their palms as they stepped back, aligning themselves with the emerging sense of justice. While others, bound by oaths or arrogance, redoubled their efforts, summoning elemental attacks that crackled with lightning or swirled with wind. The Dragon Knight stood firm, letting the storm of spells wash over him, trusting his scales to deflect most attacks, while using his wings to shield any bystanders from stray bolts. And as he did so, he felt the system within him offered tactical advice, suggesting angles of defense and reminding him to strike only when necessary. He chose his targets carefully, focusing on the lead wizard orchestrating the assault, and lunged forward with startling speed, closing the distance in a heartbeat, his claws catching the wizard's staff mid-incantation and snapping it in half, causing the spell to collapse and leaving the wizard powerless and trembling. With the lead wizard neutralized, the cohesion of the magical assault faltered, and the remaining wizards retreated, some fleeing into the palace, others dropping their hands in surrender, unsure of how to confront a dragon who preached justice while demonstrating restraint. Just as he thought the magical threat was contained, a deeper rumbling echoed from within the palace, and the ground trembled as the nobles' desperate contingency plan revealed itself. A pair of caged dragons, bred in secret and chained with heavy enchantments, were released by the nobles in a last-ditch effort to distract or destroy him. These dragons were younger and smaller than he, their scales duller, their eyes filled with both fear and anger due to years of captivity and mistreatment. And as they burst into the courtyard, their roars mingled with the screams of nobles who underestimated the chaos they had unleashed. The Dragon Knight's heart clenched at the sight of the captive dragons, recognizing that they were not his enemies, but victims of the same corruption. He fought, and he resolved to free them, rather than fight them, despite the risk of their rage being directed at him. He stepped toward them slowly, lowering his head to appear less threatening, and speaking in the ancient dragon tongue he had learned during his transformation, conveying that he was not their captor, but a fellow dragon, offering them freedom and alliance if they would calm their fury and listen.
Ow.
The captive dragons hesitated, their nostrils flaring as they sniffed the air, sensing the truth in his scent. Human and dragon intermingled, and their eyes softened slightly, confusion replacing rage as they attempted to understand his unexpected kindness. Meanwhile, the nobles behind them shouted frantically, urging the captive dragons to attack, waving torches and weapons, thinking they could control the beasts through threats and pain as they had for years. But their words only fueled the dragon's anger toward their handlers. The Dragon Knight took advantage of the moment by unleashing a precise jet of fire at the enchanted chains around the dragons' necks and limbs, his flames melting the metal but calibrated carefully to avoid burning their flesh, and he watched as the heavy restraints fell away, clattering to the ground. Freed from their bonds, the dragons reared back, shaking their limbs and stretching their wings, their roars turning from pain to relief, and they turned toward the nobles who had tormented them, mouths opening in preparation to unleash pent-up fury. The Dragon Knight quickly interposed himself between the dragons and the crowd, raising his wings to block their line of fire, and he spoke urgently in the dragon tongue, reminding them that killing indiscriminately would only perpetuate the cycle of fear and hatred that had led to their captivity in the first place. He urged them to join him in targeting those directly responsible for their suffering, promising that together they could dismantle the systems that allowed dragons to be enslaved and betrayed, while also protecting innocents who were caught in the crossfire. The newly freed dragons hesitated, their eyes flickering between the nobles and the Dragon Knight, and slowly they lowered their heads, snorting heavily but refraining from attacking blindly, signaling their agreement to a focused retribution rather than a chaotic slaughter. The nobles' panic grew as they realized their plan had backfired spectacularly. The dragons they intended to use as weapons now aligned with the very Dragon Knight they wished to destroy, and their screams of outrage and terror drowned out by the sound of flapping wings. The Dragon Knight and his new allies moved in unison toward the cluster of nobles who had released the captive dragons, and he once again recited their names and crimes, ensuring that everyone present knew why these individuals were being singled out. His voice echoing across the courtyard like a proclamation carved in stone. One dragon, a sleek emerald-scaled female, let out a stream of green-tinted fire that encircled the nobles, trapping them within a ring of flame that prevented their escape without burning them alive, while the other dragon, a stocky bronze-scaled male, used its claws to knock weapons out of the noble's hands with surprising precision. The Dragon Knight advanced his own flames, illuminating the night. As he burned away the ornate banners and tapestries that had been hung along the palace walls, symbols of the old regime that would no longer be revered, and he felt a surge of satisfaction as the fabric curled and blackened, the smell of smoke replacing the scent of perfume. He addressed the trapped nobles, telling them that their own cruelty had unleashed the force, now standing before them that their willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone for their own power had led to their undoing, and that justice would be delivered not behind closed doors but in the open, where the people could witness and judge. To further drive home the point, he invited the commoners gathered at the palace gates to step into the courtyard, to look upon the faces of those who had ruled over them with greed and malice, and to participate in determining the punishment for their misdeeds, ensuring that the voice of the oppressed was heard in the halls of power. The crowd hesitated at first, but then brave men and women stepped forward, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear, anger, and hope as they entered the courtyard, standing shoulder to shoulder with soldiers and dragons, their presence a powerful symbol of unity against tyranny. The Dragon Knight felt a swell of emotion as he watched the people. He had always fought for now taking an active role in shaping their future, and he pledged to himself that he would never allow the power he wielded to corrupt him, remembering the pain of betrayal and vowing to remain guardian, not a tyrant. He turned his attention back to the nobles, who now cowered before not only his flames and the freed dragons, but also the people they had oppressed. Their power stripped away, their titles meaningless in the face of collective justice, and he asked the crowd what they believed should be done. Voices rose in debate, some calling for execution, others for exile, some suggesting forced labor to rebuild villages destroyed by noble negligence. And the Dragon Knight listened carefully, noting the desire for punishment tempered by a wish to avoid descending into cruelty, recognizing that true justice required both accountability and humanity. After hearing the arguments, he proposed that the nobles be publicly stripped of their titles and wealth, that they be sentenced to labor under the supervision of the people they had wronged, rebuilding the communities they had neglected, and that they be branded with a mark that would remind everyone of their crimes. A compromise that satisfied the desire for accountability while offering a chance for redemption. The crowd murmured in agreement, the dragons nodded. Their massive heads, and even some of the soldiers, looked relieved at the fair judgment, and the Dragon Knight saw in their faces the beginning of trust being rebuilt, trust that had been shattered. When he was betrayed and his dragon companion slain, the nobles, trembling, were escorted away under guard, their fates now in the hands of those they had once looked down upon. And the Dragon Knight watched them go, feeling a weight lift from his chest as he realized that vengeance executed through justice was far more satisfying than slaughter fueled by rage alone. With the courtyard battle over and the immediate threat subdued, the freed dragons turned to the Dragon Knight, their eyes shining with gratitude, and they asked what he intended to do next, their voices resonant and melodic in the dragon tongue. He explained that his journey was far from over, that deeper corruption lurked within the palace, and possibly within the king himself, and that he would confront it, but he invited them to join him in reshaping the kingdom into a place where dragons and humans could coexist without fear or betrayal. The dragons exchanged glances, then nodded, pledging to stand by his side and to protect the people. Recognizing that their freedom was intertwined with the kingdom's transformation, and their allegiance filled the Dragon Knight with renewed strength and a sense of purpose greater than himself. The crowd cheered, tentative at first, and then louder as the reality of what they had witnessed sank in. A Dragon Knight who fought not against dragons but alongside them. A warrior who wielded fire yet sought justice, and the beginning of a new era, where unity might overcome centuries of distrust. The Dragon Knight took a moment to breathe, inhaling the scent of smoke, sweat, and hope, feeling the warmth of the flames and the cool night air on his scales, and he glanced up at the palace windows, where shadows flickered indications that other battles awaited him within those walls. He thanked the people for their courage and the freed dragons for their trust, and then with a powerful beat of his wings, he lifted off the ground his allies, flanking him, ready to take the fight deeper into the heart of the palace, where dark sorcery and deeper betrayal awaited, the flames of justice lighting his path forward. As he ascended, he glanced down one last time at the courtyard now filled with people and dragons, standing together amid the flickering light, and he felt a surge of pride and determination. This was not merely vengeance, but the birth of a movement that would reshape the kingdom. He vowed to honor it with every action he took. He flew toward the tallest tower where he could sense the potent pulses of forbidden magic, and the presence of the king who had either orchestrated or allowed the treachery his mind steeled for whatever he might find his heart balanced between the knight's honor and the dragon's ferocity. The sound of his wings beating against the air echoed across the night, mingling with the distant cheers and murmurs below, and he tightened his grip on the reins of his emotions, aware that the battles to come would test not just his strength, but his ability to wield power without succumbing to the very corruption he sought to eradicate. Thus, with allies at his side and justice burning within him, the Dragon Knight surged toward the next confrontation, leaving behind a courtyard forever changed, his flames illuminating not only the physical darkness of the night, but also the moral shadows that had long plagued the kingdom. Ask ChatGPT. The air above the castle smoldered with the scent of scorched banners and ash-thick wind, and beneath the blood-red sky that loomed like a morning veil above the smoldering towers, the Dragon Knight stood at the shattered gates, wings furled behind him like a folded storm, his gaze unwavering as the clash of steel echoed from every direction. His name, once roared by armies and whispered in prayer, now trembled in the mouths of men who had once marched beside him. And though his form had changed and his soul burned hotter than dragonfire, they knew, deep down, that the man beneath the scales still bore the memories of their shared oaths. A group of knights emerged from the smoke-laced courtyard, their armor still, bearing the crests of valor that once flew beside his standard, and among them walked the swordsman Gareth, the shield maiden Ellen the mage, Ulrich comrades, who had once fought beside him beneath banners of unity, their expressions now twisted by conflict that neither time nor betrayal could erase. "Stand down," Gareth called out, but the plea faltered beneath the weight of his own doubt. For before him stood not a beast, but the echo of the friend who had once pulled him from death at a door beneath the shattered walls of Westreach. The Dragon Knight did not raise his clawed hand nor ignite the embers sleeping behind his eyes. Instead, he took a slow step forward. Each movement deliberates, each breath a silent roar against the tides of betrayal that had soaked the soil beneath his feet. "I remember the fields of Virulon," he said, his voice rumbling through the bones of the courtyard. "I remember Ellen's blade striking down the war-born worm. I remember Ulrich shielding us beneath his barrier until his nose bled crimson. I remember how we fought not for kings but for each other, and his words cracked the silence more than any flame could. Their hands trembled not from fear, but from memory, from the weight of past oaths, that now felt like chains and even as orders." Echoed behind them from commanders who knew nothing of honor, their weapons lowered inch by inch, as if burdened by guilt and haunted by the ghosts of camaraderie. But before peace could bloom, the air split with a command sharp as frostbite. General Kadros, the king's dog of war, arrived atop a beast stitched from bones and black, magic his eyes hollowed by decades of blind loyalty and bloodshed. Kadros hurled a spear of obsidian flame, the weapon twisting with forbidden runes that burned the air as it passed. But the Dragon Knight raised his wing, letting the enchanted bones of dragonkind absorb the impact, the force scattering fragments of fire into the dust where they hissed like serpents. "You were always a rabid cur," he growled, each word thick with fire and memory, chained to the throne, drinking its lies like wine, and with a mighty thrust, he launched himself skyward, the wind becoming his chorus. The clash above the courtyard was a dance of wings and wrath, the night reforged in dragonfire and a general possessed by shadows. And every blow shook the stones below, where Gareth and Ellen and Ulrich watched with clenched jaws, their hearts unraveling beneath the weight of divided loyalty. The system flared within the Dragon Knight's vision, images flashing of futures drenched in fire and sorrow, of towns razed and faces twisted in terror, of a kingdom reborn, not through justice, but through the torment of flame. His heart ached beneath the scales, for even now, even after all the betrayals, he yearned not for blood but for truth, for redemption. for a path that did not require the breaking of every oath he had ever sworn. And as Kedros struck again, he dodged not out of hate but with the grace of a man who still remembered who he used to be. "You fear what I've become," he shouted, mid-air voice carried on the storm of his wings. "But I fear what I might become if I forget what I once was." And with those words, he unleashed a roar, not of fury, but of anguish, that split the heavens. Kedros fell, not from a fatal wound but from exhaustion, from the weight of hatred finally snapping the bones it had hollowed. And as he struck the ground in a heap of ash and sputtering magic, the Dragon Knight descended beside him. No blade raised, only silence held between them like a final judgment. Gareth approached slowly, armor clinking with hesitation, eyes searching the face of the friend he had once sworn to follow. And though he stood ready, sword at his side, his heart had already yielded to something deeper than duty. "I never believed you were the monster they claimed," Ellen whispered. Her voice choked with emotion as she stepped forward, tears streaking through soot on her cheeks. "I wanted to. It made everything easier. But when I saw you free those dragons, when I saw you spare the children in the lower courts, I knew," and the Dragon Knight simply bowed his head, for her words cut deeper than any blade. Ulrich lowered his staff, magic flickering to nothing in his palm. His gaze cast toward the burning palace as if seeing it for the first time through unclouded eyes. The system shimmered again, less a prompt now, and more a mirror, reflecting back a vision of Balance a Kingdom, where justice reigned through fire, but not fear. Where dragons soared not as tyrants but as equals, where men who once betrayed could still atone if given the chance, and it asked him a question he could not ignore. Will you be their reckoning or their rebirth? He looked to Gareth, to Ellen, to Ulrich, to the three who had been his sword, his shield, his light, and he saw not enemies, but friends caught in a war between memory and obedience. And so he chose restraint, where he could have chosen annihilation. He offered unity, where vengeance beckoned louder, and though the fires behind him still smoldered, he raised his claw not to destroy but to point to a new path, one where pain forged wisdom, not wrath. Behind him, the dragons roared, not with fury but with purpose, and beside him stood three warriors, no longer bound by titles or crown, but by a new oath, one forged in ash, tempered in sorrow, and sealed by choice. As the sun broke through the smoky veil above the ruined court, casting golden light upon the blood-stained stone, a new era was born, not of dragon or man alone, but of both, joined by scars and dreams alike. And in that moment, the Dragon Knight knew the path ahead would not be easy, would not be clean, but it would be his. Carved not by blade or fire alone, but by heart. Kedros was dragged away by his own beast, defeated but not slain, left to ponder his own servitude in the hollow dark he had once called strength. The system faded into stillness, not gone, but quiet, waiting, as if recognizing that the knight had passed the trial that mattered most, the battle not of flesh, but of soul. The dragons circled high above, casting shadows like wings of fate upon the ruined kingdom below, and in their flight, the people began to believe that perhaps the age of fear was ending. Whispers spread through the rubble-strewn streets, whispers not of vengeance but of justice, of a knight who had become a dragon and chose to save what had tried to kill him. The Dragon Knight stood atop the palace ruins, watching the people gather below, their eyes filled not with terror but with cautious hope. And though their voices did not cheer, they did not scream either, and perhaps that was enough for now. He turned toward the dawn, wings rising as a wind from the mountains carried with it the smell of pine and frost and freedom, and he knew the kingdom would never be the same. He had been reborn in fire, but what he built next would not be a kingdom of flames, but a home where no knight need become a dragon to be heard. And as Gareth knelt, not in submission, but in solidarity, the Dragon Knight placed a clawed hand upon his shoulder and said simply, "Then let us begin." Ellen and Ulrich followed, not as soldiers, but as kindred souls, and together they stepped forward not into battle, but into rebuilding. The past could not be undone. The blood would never be unspilled. But in the echoes of betrayal, something stronger had been forged. And in the heart of the Dragon Knight, the war quieted, not ended. But softened by the knowledge that he had not become the monster they feared, he had become something greater. Not man, not dragon, but something in between. Something that might, just might, lead a kingdom out of darkness and into the light. And though the fires still burned behind him, ahead, he saw a road paved in redemption. And for the first time since the Void Dragon's death, he stepped forward without looking back. The throne room, once a sanctum of gilded arrogance and velvet deception, now lay in ruin. Its columns cracked like the promises of the kingdom it once upheld. And through the fractured stained glass where saints of old once watched, sunlight spilled like judgment, illuminating the path of the Dragon Knight who stepped across the blood-streaked marble with silent fury in his soul. Each footfall echoed like a hammer on anvil, not just because of the weight of his form scaled, seared and reborn, but because of the storm of purpose that surged behind his eyes, a storm forged from betrayal, loss, and the embers of justice. The king sat upon the blackened throne, no longer the proud ruler of a golden realm, but a man cloaked in dark sorcery, his once human features now warped by power stolen from the same dragons he had ordered slain. His voice a rasp of rot and ambition that filled the room like poison. "You returned," the king sneered, his hands crackling with cursed flame. "But not as the savior I commanded. You return as the monster they feared," and even as he rose, the darkness pooled beneath him like shadows given breath. The Dragon Knight said nothing at first, his gaze fixed not on the corrupted monarch, but on the throne itself, for it was not power he sought, but the end of its tyranny, the end of a crown soaked in the blood of innocents and dragons alike. "You called me weapon, then discarded me," he said at last, his voice quiet yet cavernous. "You killed what I loved, and blamed me for surviving." And as he spoke, the fires around him began to dance, not with destruction, but with resolve. The king struck first, a beam of necrotic energy lashing out like the tongue of a viper. But the Dragon Knight met it not with defense, but with flight, his wings erupting outward and lifting him into the air as flame encircled him like a halo of vengeance. Above the throne, the clash began a cyclone of fire and shadow, of dragonborn wrath and kingly corruption, their powers colliding in bursts of light that shattered the remaining windows and sent tremors through the bones of the palace. The king summoned the souls of fallen dragons, twisted echoes bound by ancient sorcery, but the Dragon Knight, heart pierced with memory, roared a cry that reached even the beyond, and those spirits turned not upon him, but upon their defiler, ripping at the darkness like wolves at chains. "You think the crown grants you dominion?" The Dragon Knight thundered as he descended, claws wreathed in flame, but it was always the people who bled, always the dragons who died, and now you shall reap what you have sown. The king's laughter turned to screams as his magic faltered, his spells unraveling under the weight of truth. And in a final act of cowardice, he reached not for sword or word, but for the throne itself, hoping its presence would save him. But the Dragon Knight struck not the man, but the symbol, shattering the throne with a single blow, its obsidian crown splintering into dust, its legacy ending in silence. As the king fell to his knees, stripped of power and pride, the Dragon Knight stood over him, not as an executioner, but as a judge, forged in flame, and he said, "This kingdom ends today not in blood, but in reckoning." He turned his back as the king collapsed into ash, the last vestige of a dying era crumbling behind him, and stepped through the ruined halls where silence now held reverence instead of fear. Outside, the people had gathered, drawn by the roar of magic and the scent of change, and when the Dragon Knight emerged, they did not cheer, they did not kneel, they watched, breath held, as history stepped into the sun. Behind him flew the dragons, no longer hiding, no longer hunted, but flying free across the sky like living banners of the new age, their wings casting shadows of freedom across the broken capital. The Dragon Knight spoke not of rulership, but of restoration, vowing a kingdom where strength served justice, where dragons and men would no longer be chained by fear, but lifted by honor. Gareth, Ellen, and Ulrich stood beside him, their weapons lowered, not in surrender, but in solidarity. And the people, uncertain but stirred, began to step forward, not as subjects, but as citizens. The system, silent until now, reappeared only once, its words simple. You chose the path of the dragon, but walked it with the heart of a knight, and then, like mist at dawn, it vanished forever. The ashes of the old kingdom scattered into the wind, and from them rose the promise of a future reborn, not through conquest, but through choice. And so the Dragon Knight, once betrayed, once broken, stood not as king, not as monster, but as the bridge between flame and flesh, between legend and life, between past and possibility. His tale would be told for generations, not as a warning of power lost, but as a song of redemption earned. And in the shadow of his wings, a reforged kingdom was born.